Hi, I'm Lori Jordan. I'm the owner of Bbox Designs, and I'm here today to talk to you about remote working, which all of us are doing a lot more of these days. So let's go through the agenda for this workshop. First we're going to talk about the various remote setup types. So let's explore the ways an organization can actually set themselves up for going remote. The culture of going remote, so everything from communication to are you going to do in-person activities, and the overall setup really that a company can do for remote. And let's also talk about, okay, you have all this information, now what do you do with it? So who am I? I am Lori Jordan. I have worked in various industries, mostly in media and entertainment and digital distribution. So I started my world around kind of interactive television into movie distribution online and digital content packaging. I had a quick stop in textiles and manufacturing. And then I did work at the Cal Poly CIE running the accelerator and the on-campus incubator for a few years. And then I moved back into startup land, and I worked for a company in the machine learning space. I'm currently doing consulting for companies who need go-to-market planning and helping even with remote culture setup. And then I also am working on my own startup in the med tech wellness space. So let's jump in. So what types of remote setups are there? It's not just one size fits all. And even with these three, I would say there's things that branch off from here. So one is you can go fully remote, which is you literally have no office space. Everyone works from wherever they are located, and you don't have any requirements for being inside of a space. There's partially remote, which is you have some team members who are distributed, but you still have an office somewhere that serves as your headquarters. So this is what a lot of companies are talking about doing as we come out of COVID. You'll hear talk of we'll have a smaller office space, but people can use it when they need to and want to meet with their colleagues. So this is kind of seems to be the way that a lot of people are starting to think about remote. And then there's also mostly an office, which really isn't so much being remote, but I wanted to at least touch on it because there is this idea that you have a primary workspace, which is your office, but you have a strong work from home policy. So this is another way that you can think about remote. And there's challenges. There's a lot of challenges in remote setup. I, in various startups that I've been part of, have been fully remote. I've been partially remote. I've been in office with work from home policies, and all of them have their own sets of challenges. But I think the first two is what we'll focus on, which is this fully remote or partially remote for this workshop. And in those remote setups, you really have to think about how the workforce is going to be challenged. And there's a lot of things to think about. So culture staying consistent. You now have people that are all over potentially the world, and the company culture can easily break down when you're actually not in the same building. Communication. It feels like we actually have more tools at our disposal for communicating when people are remote, but it really does turn out that communication can really break down between people and teams when you are remote. And a lot of the reason is in the next bullet point, which is teams start to become a little more siloed is what people find in this remote setup. And what happens is teams naturally start to talk with each other, and they're not having these kind of hallway interactions, water cooler conversations, going to get coffee together, even if they're on different teams. So they don't communicate as much across the team. So you have to be really active in making sure that that's happening. Less organic interactions, which we just kind of talked about, and feeling of isolation. And this is a big one. In fact, Slack just released a whole thing on remote working, and the biggest takeaway was that most people at some point do feel some form of isolation. And so that's something that we really need to talk about and be aware of and try and do things that help people feel a little less isolated with their team members. There's also worries about advancement opportunities. This especially applies, I think, in a partial remote because there starts to become this feeling of, am I in front of my peers enough? Am I in front of my boss enough? Am I going to be thought of when there's a promotion available inside the team? Onboarding new employees. So how do you do it? How do you make sure someone feels like they're part of the team on day one? It's a lot harder when there's not an in-person component. Appearance for favoritism for those who are coming in the office. This is a big one and people feel it. So it's really trying to create policies and interactions that make sure people who are remote feel just as needed and just as, talked to all the time and communicated with as people who are in the office. And voices being heard. You probably have all been on that Zoom call where either you or one of your peers is not feeling like they're getting heard, isn't really getting, called on. And that can be a real big problem over time because you have different interactions when you're in person and different ways to read body language. But when you're remote and on a Zoom call, those body languages don't come through, and sometimes people, don't get heard and they get talked over a lot more. So it's really being conscious of this. And then fear of missing out. Let's face it, people feel like if there's a group in the office and they're together, there must be something great going on. We have that inherent, human nature to feel like if I'm not in it with the others, that there's something I'm missing out on. So now that we've talked about the challenges, let's talk about how we try and overcome them and create a real remote strategy for your team, whether it's fully remote or partially remote. One thing that I have seen works extremely well with teams that I've worked on that are remote is this idea of having agreements across the team of what remote will look like for you. And this is really personalized for you and your team and your company. But sitting down and talking about what do meetings look like? When do we have a meeting that's on Zoom? When do we have a meeting that's over the phone? When can it be done, really through email? Having agreements about how we think about meetings in a little bit of a different way, so hopefully we're not getting Zoom fatigue and sitting, in front of a computer just with talking heads for 8 hours a day. That's really not effective. So getting an agreement across the team about that. Work hours. So this is a big one, especially if your remote team is, in different time zones, which every remote team I've worked on has had people at least on East Coast and West Coast, and I've had some that are even international. So we would make an agreement around the hours that we were all generally available. So, for instance, we would say like from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific time, everyone around the globe is available in those hours. So if I put a meeting there, I pretty much expect that you, and if your calendar is empty, that you will show up to that meeting or you will be available to talk to. Of course, there's exceptions, but this is really just for the whole team to agree to. Quiet periods. This is an interesting one. There's an idea of flow when you're working, and you know it when you have it, which is you're in this amazing moment, you're getting a lot done, you feel really focused, no one's interrupting you. And sometimes when you're remote, you almost get interrupted more because you're getting pings from Slack and email and texts and phone calls and Zoom alerts. So if there's an agreement across the company that, Wednesdays from noon to 4 p.m. Pacific time, nobody is to send Slack messages, no one is to send text messages or phone calls, to allow a person to have that 4 hours of uninterrupted time. And in some companies, I've seen a full day, and some I've seen them do it for 2 different blocks of time during the week. But it's an agreement in the company that you will not interrupt people during those hours. In-person meetups. This is a big one. People kind of forget once you're remote, it's like, oh, are we going to see each other ever? And I personally encourage you to do this. I think a lot of teams will start to talk about, do we have a full company meetup in person somewhere at a remote location? If you don't have an office, obviously you need to pick a spot. If you have an office, maybe it's that everybody comes to the office for a couple days, but really a time for people to see each other in person, do work in person, do planning in person. It's great for end of year or even mid-year kind of check-ins. There's another side of this, which is, do your teams individually have a chance to meet in person? So, for instance, we used to have, meetups with our business team to do some planning, maybe once a quarter. Sometimes our development teams, would get together, once every quarter or so to do kind of code fest for a couple days. So this is a really great way for people to interact in person every once in a while and still have that feeling of kind of that team and bonding and camaraderie in these in-person moments. Communication. So how are we going to communicate with each other, and why will we use this system for communicating? So, how are you going to use Slack? How will you use email? How will you use texting and Zoom and other tools for communicating with each other, and really sticking with that and knowing that that's how you will operate as an organization. A great example is, I know of organizations that say internal communication is Slack only, and email is really reserved for those emails that you send to clients. And that way you can really know where to look for information. You're not having to look in 3 different places to see where something might be. Document sharing, having an agreement about where they go. Some teams will only use G Suite, so you're going to use Google, Drive to keep all documents. Some have it across multiple areas, so Might use Box if you're going to use documents that go outside the organization, Dropbox for other things, and Google Documents, but knowing how they work and why you're using them. And then, coffee, lunch, social hours. Will you do these? How will you do them? Will they be, once a week, the whole company gets together on a Friday morning to have coffee together? There's no agenda. There's nothing that has to be talked about. It's really just a time for people to check in with each other, knowing what that looks like. And then vacation communication. This was in my last company, and it was brilliant. Our chief operating officer came up with it. And she really changed my whole idea of what it means to go on vacation and come back and have the right communication tools. So what she would do is have everyone make a document before they left on vacation. And the rule was when you got back, you were not expected to go back in time in Slack. You were not expected to go back in time in email. You had a document that if someone had something really important happen while you were on vacation that they need your opinion on or need you to take care of, they put it in that document with a link to wherever they wanted you to go to look at the information. And then that was your kind of source of truth as you got back. This was huge. It changed the game. I use it all the time. When I go on vacation, I tell people I will not look at anything that happened. I'm not going to find those 1,000 messages on Slack. Just tell me in this document. Really, really great way to have your team work well. And it also makes vacation, honestly, more of a vacation because people aren't pinging you on these services and you can truly turn them off while you're gone. All right, so we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about agreements we'll have, so now how do we start to implement this across the company? And really one great way is through tools that we have accessible to us. So obviously the big one is email, and I know people have these arguments every day about is email still even relevant? Yes, it's still relevant. I think it's how you use it. So in my life, I generally use it mostly for external communications with clients, and I can attach documents and I can make sure that they get all the information with people CC'd who need to know about it. For internal communication, I generally use text messaging or Slack. And then internal, we also use a customer relationship management tool. There's so many available to you out there. I'll let you choose the one you want to use. But this is super important, I think, across an organization. And it's more than just a sales tool. I used it in my marketing world. I've used it in my product marketing world. Even for investor flow, you can really set up some great ways for people across the organization to see who you're talking to, when you're talking to them, and all the notes that are attached to that, including the emails that have gone back and forth. This is especially great when you have a new onboarding employee who needs to know really quickly what is happening in a client's world. They can go to that CRM, look at the client, and be up to speed, much faster than if you didn't have this. Video conferencing, of course. I know I've been saying kind of Zoom fatigue. I feel like this is now becoming the nomenclature for video conferencing, but obviously there's a lot of options out there. You can use Zoom, there's Google Meet, there's BlueJeans by Microsoft, there's many others. So you really have to decide what your organization will use. Of course, internally, I think it's really great to decide on one so that it's consistent and you can integrate it into your calendar system. Of course, when you're dealing with clients, if they set up a meeting, they may use something else. So just be aware that you may have to download software before a meeting. But there's lots of great options out there these days. Document sharing, we kind of covered this a little bit in the agreements, but I think it's really important to know where documents go and have some kind of plan about how you save documents, even how you name documents, especially when I was on product teams, it got really important to know what version we were looking at, what was the latest and greatest, what was the source of truth. So I think it's important for your teams to know where to put things and then where to put them for clients. And so in some of my startups, we have a special Google Drive that we open up to external people. For others, we only use Dropbox or Box when we're doing external, and we use only Google Documents for internal, so there's never confusion and there's never the idea that someone from external could get into something internal by accident. I personally actually like that one because it really does save you from making huge errors of sending the wrong document to the wrong group of people. Calendar sharing, so which calendar will you use? I personally use Google Calendar at this point, but there's many options. Obviously, you have Outlook, you've got Google Calendar, you've got iCal, and others. So you just need to decide how you're going to manage that and make them available so people can schedule meetings with you easily. And this includes even external. I know when I'm using Google Calendar, if I'm dealing with another group that has Google Calendar, where we can share our calendars with each other, especially if it's a partner that I'm dealing with on a daily basis. It's nice to be able to just see their calendar and put meetings when I need to, and vice versa. So I think it's really important to think about how you use your calendars internally and externally. And then collaboration tools. So we're obviously in this world now where you're not getting in a room together and whiteboarding, or getting in a room together for a whole day and doing these strategic sessions. So how do you do this now in a new world? And in remote in general, you're not going to be doing that every day. Even if you have in-person every quarter, you still have to do a lot of, kind of collaboration type events that will be remote. So we're going to get into those, and there's a lot of great options. I'm only going to skim the surface on this during this webinar, but I really want you to look into the tools that are out there for you to use. Even Zoom has a whiteboarding tool. It's not perfect, but they have it too. Okay, so let's go into tool examples. So I mentioned some things. So we have communication tools that are around customer relationship management. Again, this can be used to track sales leads. This can be used to track investor leads if you're going into your next round. And I really call it the central source of truth. This is where everything should live. Every contact you have for the company should be in this system. So it is super easy to have that data available to anyone at any time. Even if someone leaves, they don't take their contacts with them. You have the contacts that they are owned by the company. And there's a lot of options. There's Sugar CRM, there's HubSpot, there's Salesforce, there's Copper, there's a lot of others. So you have to make the decision for which one works for you. Make sure you're looking at what kind of plugins they offer. If they offer the plugins you want that go into things like Slack and email and other things that you want to track and have it do it automatically, so you don't have to go back and forth between systems. This can be super important. But anyway, I'll let you kind of take it from there. But this is a good thing to have inside your company, I think, especially when you're remote and you're not always in front of each other talking about your client leads every day. Communication tool, Slack, we've talked about this a little bit. It can be linear and non-linear. You can do it in real time where you're chatting with someone. You can also put things into a channel and let people, come read it when they have a chance. You can alert people. You can plug things in. So I think what's really exciting is, like for our team, we have GitHub plugged in, Zendesk can be plugged in, Jira for your Jira tickets can be plugged in, and even G Drive and a ton of other things. This is 4 of literally, I think, hundreds of thousands of plugins they have available. Super great for automation. I love it because as the CEO of my company, it's nice to be able to go into the GitHub channel every once in a while and just see where we're at in the progression of launching the product. Even the Jira tickets, it's nice to go in and just see what's getting done and what bugs we have and what bugs are getting fixed and what things that product marketing is now hearing need to be put into the product. And it's really nice to have it automated and not have someone have to go and redo their work. They just do it one time in Jira and it automatically shows up in a Slack channel. It's another thing that's great. Another thing that's great is that it's searchable. So if people start writing about a specific project, you can just search that project name and all of the Slacks that are about that will come up. And another thing is if you start to pay for Slack, you can actually create channels now in Slack that include clients. So I was the head of partnerships for my last company. This was amazing because I had channels where I literally had me and the partners on the channel and we could go back and forth in Slack, and all of that communication was now kept in one place for the company and we could all search it. So I highly recommend you look at all the options you have. Again, Slack can be free, but as soon as you start paying, you do get some of these other amazing features. I think that one is actually the one I am most excited about, is the ability to go external with Slack and keep all of the conversations, internal so that you can search them anytime in the future. So now let's talk about another collaboration tool I think is really powerful, and it's called Neural. And I was using this actually in the university system. It's really where I think they started to get their foothold, but now everyone I know that's doing remote is using Mural a lot. And the reason is that they give you a way to collaborate. It's more than just a whiteboard. As you can see here, I've done a screenshot of an empathy map, but they have these predefined templates, and they now have over 100 of them, I believe. Everything from a business model canvas to an empathy map to a party planning to anything you need, and you can actually create your own templates as well. And what happens is your whole team goes in there, and usually the way I've seen it used is you're in there and you're also on a call. So maybe a Zoom call or even just a conference call, but everyone's working in real time and able to see what's happening just like you would in a whiteboard. But you have these Post-it notes, you can see here, Post-it notes that kind of allow you to type in information and place them where they would go inside this template, or even just a blank whiteboard. I think it's amazingly powerful, and I can't get into all the details of what Mural does because it would take, that's its own webinar. But I think it's extremely powerful. It really helps teams get organized. I've used it many, many times with different clients, and they get blown away by how much they accomplish in a very quick time frame with multiple people working in the same space. I really think you should go check it out. It's mural.co, so not mural.com, but mural.co, and I think you'll really find that it can help your team. They are affordable, and they really can help you get, I think, more out of these collaboration sessions that are remote than you do without it. And this is a new one. This is called Pogo. It's pogo.io. What they are really good at is actually giving you a central source of truth for meetings specifically. And so what I use it for is when I'm going to have a meeting with a team and we're going to talk about a topic, I will put all the documents in this area. I'll put any websites I might reference. I'll put photos. I'll put things that we all need to look at. And they know when they go into that board that it's always up to date and it's the thing that we should be looking at for this meeting. So not only does it get people prepped for the meeting, but even during the meeting, I'll use it, and even other people who are using it will use it to look at those items together. And it has chat, it has markup, so you can mark up items and say, hey, let's look at this a little bit closer with comments. So it's a really great source of truth for, I think, individual meetings, and that's how I use it. Again, it's pogo.io. I think they're still in beta, but you can sign up for an account and start using it with your team and see how it might help you get your meetings a little bit more organized. I think all of us have had that moment where you're in Google Drive looking for all those documents you said you were going to talk about, and all of a sudden you're on the wrong one, or someone's pulled up a different one and nobody's in there. So this is a great way to kind of keep it all centralized for your team. And speaking of meetings, this is a big one. So as we know, when you're remote, you have a lot of meetings when you're in person too, but when you're remote, you have a lot of meetings that I think happen because people aren't in person and just kind of running into each other or walking over to each other's office to talk to each other. So I really go into this in depth around remote because I think it keeps the team a lot more organized, and it also helps you see, do we actually need a meeting for this topic? So when you do pre-meeting management, I think it's super important to create an agenda. I think having an agenda keeps people on task, but it also helps people prepare for the meeting in the right way. Also, what I've noticed is when I start creating an agenda, sometimes I'll find out, I don't actually need a meeting. What I really need is to create a Slack, conversation, or have a quick phone call, or even just an email with the client, and we can do this back and forth, without a meeting. Make sure you're sending pre-meeting materials to all attendees so they have a couple days to look at them, think about them, and be prepared, so you're not wasting time in the meeting getting people up to speed on things they can already be up to speed on. And then setting your attendee expectations. So I've had meetings where I'm coming in and really the goal of the meeting is actually to deliver news about a decision that's already been made, but people thought they were coming into a meeting where I was actually looking for feedback. And that can become, you're wasting time, and people are now prepared for something that is actually not the purpose of the meeting. So, and then the same way, the other way, if I'm coming in because I really need feedback from everyone in this meeting, and they think I'm coming in to just let them know about what a decision was, at the top, everyone's kind of confused, and it just makes for a less productive meeting for everyone. And then outcome expectations. So we're not just having a meeting because meetings are fun. We need to have an outcome from this. So I think setting in the agenda why you're having this meeting and what you expect to come out of it. So do you expect, if you're planning a big event, let's say, you expect to come out of this with clear ownership of each area of the event and who's going to make the calls and what is going to happen in the next 7 days for that area for each person. I think it's really important to have outcome expectations. Otherwise, everyone leaves and then nothing happens. And we've all been there. We've all had that happen in a meeting we've been in. Now, during the meeting, it's a little bit different. Now you're in the phase of you're having the meeting, let's document. So I always like to have a document open that's collaborative. So I usually do use Google Docs, but there's other ways to do this, where everyone is actually taking notes in the document, and we're keeping time of what's happening, and then we're setting down, who took ownership of what during the meeting. So we always come out of it with action items and a person attached. I also am really a stickler about making sure everyone's being heard. So every once in a while, I'll actually stop, when a discussion is stopping. And if someone hasn't really been talking during most of the meeting, I will ask them, is there anything you want to add to this? Is there anything you want to say here? I want to make sure everyone is heard. You're not here just to listen. If I bring someone to a meeting, it's because I need your input and you to be part of the discussion. And have clear next steps with owners assigned. I said this earlier, but again, making sure that, Sue knows that she's the one who is going to call the banquet hall and make sure that it's scheduled for the right date and has food and all of that organized. And know that, Dave is going to be the one that calls the camera crew to make sure they're there to do filmography of the event. So having clear expectations from each person. And then again, make sure, is this something that actually requires, a meeting? And could it actually be an email? Could it be a Slack? Could it be some other communication tool that you've agreed on with the team? A lot of times you will find out as you start to set the agenda that this could be done without having a full in-person meeting. Because when you start to add up the cost of having 5 people and their hourly, cost, meetings get expensive very, very quickly. So let's stop that. So I think this is really a great way to think about meetings so that as you go into them and have them and come out of them, everybody feels like something was accomplished and that they have something to do on the other side to get to the next big milestone. All right, so we just talked about meetings, but I also want to talk about how we can get creative with meetings because, again, we all have this video conferencing fatigue where we're just watching talking heads all day, and that is not fun, it is not productive, and let's face it, after 3 to 4 hours of those, you are really wiped. And so let's think about other ways we can do it. So what I have done with people on my team who love to walk and talk, and I'm one of those people, I love to go for a walk. When I worked in a building, I would always say, hey, let's go walk and get coffee and have, talk about this stuff. So I call them walk and talks. And what we do is we say, this doesn't require a video call. This doesn't require me to even be at my desk. Let's both take a walk wherever we are, and we'll have a conference call on the phone. And in fact, sometimes we'll even send pictures to each other of what we're seeing on our walk. But I find that this is not only more productive sometimes, it just gets you out of your, routine of sitting at a desk all day. And everybody I've done this with loves it. And I find it to be really fun. And I actually think we get, sometimes more creative ideas flowing just because we're kind of out of our zone and we're out walking. Gaming and talking. This one I have not personally done, but I keep hearing about it, that people who like the same video game, or even who don't, but just kind of want a different experience, they're finding various games either online or even if they all have like a PS4 or Xbox, they'll get on and do gaming and they'll kind of work through an issue while they're playing the game. And I think this is really interesting because, again, it's taking your brain into a different format, but it's allowing you to hang out in a different way and not be just in front of your desk talking at a camera. Kahoot. This one, a friend of mine did. We had a meeting and they said, hey, I want to kind of just do a quiz with everyone just to kind of warm up because not all of us know each other very well. So he created this thing that's used mostly, I think, in K through 12, but I found it really fun. It's a thing where you can set up a quiz and everybody gets the app on their either phone or iPad or their computer. And when the question comes up, everybody answers using their own device. And then you see who got, the most questions right or wrong. It can be a really good way to just do an icebreaker and do something a little different. Virtual lunch or coffee. So sometimes I'll just say, hey, let's all both go grab our lunches and, sit wherever you want, be cozy, be comfortable. And let's just have kind of a casual conversation about the things that are going on. A lot of times right now with my company, I'm doing this with my co-founder when we can just, kind of sit and talk and take a break. It kind of forces both of us to step away from the computer and actually eat, or have a cup of coffee together. And then learning from team members. I love this one, which is maybe at each kind of team, weekly get together, you ask one of your team members to talk about one of their hobbies or something they've learned that week, or even a software program. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't even have to be about the project. So some examples are, people who are really into bread making, tell you how they, go through making bread. And usually it's about a 5 or 10 minute, quick overview of something that they love to do. Others have talked about, woodworking because that's what they do in their spare time, or even computer programming, things that they've found out and love, or different languages that they're looking at. So it can be a really great way to get to know your team members in a different way, but it doesn't have to take up a ton of time, but it does give you kind of a break in your meeting that's a little bit different. I encourage you to think about other ways to get creative. I don't think meetings need to just be people looking into a camera talking at each other. I think they can be creative and different and fun, and actually get people out of their normal routine. And that always leads to better creativity. Let's face it, no major awesome idea that's really fun and amazing probably happened in 4 white walls while people were just sitting at a desk looking at each other. And I feel like the same is true with video conferencing. So let's get out of that and start to really get our brains into a different pace with meetings. Okay, so we're done with meetings. Well, not done, they're never done, but we're done talking about them. But we're gonna move into onboarding, which is really bringing on the new employees and getting them set up and comfortable as quickly as possible and feeling like they're part of the team. So I like to think about, how is a person going to experience the company on day one? And I think one big thing is there a one sheet that you can prepare for this person so they have all the information, things like, who do I go to? Who do I call when I have a question about my health insurance? Who do I, call about payroll? Who do I talk to about, looking at JIRA tickets? How do I get an account set up over here because I don't have one? All of those little questions, I think a one sheet is really helpful, and it gives them a place to go every time they need to answer a question or find out where to go to get a question answered. The other thing I love, and this happened at my last company and I loved it, which was called a mentor program. So every new employee got paired with someone who had been at the company for at least a couple months, and it gave them someone they could interact with on day one. No question was off limits. And I thought it worked really well. I had someone who helped me, just find where do I put documents, or where do I find these documents, or what templates do I use when I'm creating a, spreadsheet or a presentation for this person. Who's the person I go to for this? Is it this person on this team or is it this person on that team? So that was super helpful. And it also gave me someone that I knew in the company on day one who was kind of my, my company friend that could help me navigate and that I could talk to throughout the day. The other one is device and account setup on day one. This is a big one. You want your person to feel like they are part of the company on day one, and a big piece of that is that they have their computer, they have all their accounts set up that they are going to need, and if they are getting a phone, if they're getting other things, make sure that that is in their possession on day one. Many companies, I encourage you to send it out the week before their first day, so there's plenty of time for them to get it. They are under no obligation to open it until day one, but they have it. And make sure your IT people are getting them set up to have their email account, their Slack account, JIRA account if they need it, other communication tools. So I think this is a super important moment for the new employee. And when these things don't come together, it just feels like they were forgotten. So let's not forget our new employees. And then communication. So how is that first day going to look with communication? Will there be an intro of the new person, on Slack and a morning stand-up? How is that going to look? How are you going to communicate with them if you're their boss? Are you going to, see them in the morning, talk to them again midday, talk to them again at the end of the day, make sure that they have everything they need? Are there any questions they have? And then after the first week and after the first month, and then obviously so on and so forth. So thinking about communication with those new employees so they really feel heard, but also that they are, also getting kind of evaluated and feel like there's someone who is looking at what they're doing and that they're doing it well and doing it right and getting that positive reinforcement. And then, feedback in general. How are you going to give them feedback? Do you have a process with, HR where you actually make sure that they are hearing from you and maybe even their peers about, are there things that they're missing? Are there things that they're doing well? Make sure that they're hearing about that and not waiting until, a 6-month review to be told, oh, you just never really get this right. Let's make sure we're telling them right away so they can fix it. And then a central fact for all of your employees, I think, is super helpful. Some people use wikis. Some people, have a document in their central document area that is really all of those questions, and it's a living document. So as different questions come up, you may add them to this document over time, and it just gives people a place to understand, what are the common questions? How do I get this answered? And not have to go, searching for it all over the place and asking 20 people. Okay, so we've gone through all of the topics for remote working at a high level, and now what are you going to do with this information? How are you going to implement this across your organization? And what things will you take with you from this presentation to actually implement? So I want you to think about your organization and how you want your remote setup to look. And the reality is every single company will look a little different. So you have to think about your people, your setup, your number of employees, employees, number of locations. How you want it to look is going to be very unique to you, but I think you can take a lot from this workshop and start to kind of make it your own. I do encourage you, if you are large enough to have an E-team, to meet with your executive team and actually start to put together a remote plan that's for kind of company-wide, and then each team of the company, so that people really have an understanding of what this can look like at the large, full company level, and then at each individual team level, because even each team, if you're large enough, may look a little bit different in how they're actually using their remote setup. And then continue to get feedback from your company. So not just your E-team at this point. You need to be getting feedback from every member of the company about what's working for them and what's not working for them, so you can actually address it. If you start to hear from a lot of people that this thing is not working for them, you probably have something you need to really look at and change, tweak, and get some feedback and find out how it could be better. And then what I encourage you is, look, you're not going to be able to implement an entire plan on day one, but what you can do is start with those key tools and agreements that you know will work across the organization, or that you at least want to start to put in place. Put those in place and get people to start using them, and then start to get feedback on a consistent basis as you set this up. And then start adding, more things to your plan, and keep implementing more and keep putting things out there, and eventually you'll have the full plan in place. And it's still organic, right? This will always be an organic thing that's happening, and will always be changing and moving, especially with new tools that come on the market and things that you want to do. But really start with those few things will work, so that everybody gets comfortable, and then move out from there. And continue to communicate with your team, so you're always getting feedback. I come from product marketing, so I love this cycle of getting feedback, and I think it works internally as well for something like this. So just keep talking, keep listening as teams, and really hearing what you can do to make it better for everyone. And then, if you're really struggling, or you just, you don't have the time to kind of schedule all of these things, you can get help from outside consultants to help get you started, help you kind of build a plan as a team, facilitate the discussion. Sometimes teams just need someone to be in the room that actually isn't emotionally connected to everyone, to help you facilitate those first early discussions to put the plan in place. And then you can do it on your own from there. So that's a great way, to get started. I know I'm available to do that, but there's a lot of consultants through SBDC and other places that you can get help for this particular need of your company. Thank you so much for your time, and if you'd like to get in touch with me, please do at Lori@bboxdesigns.com. I'm always happy to talk to you about the needs you may have with your organization, and I think now we're going to take some questions from the audience.